Thanks for having me. I do apologise, I got back very late from Gamescom last night, so if I stutter, and also a disclaimer, I am not as cool as the real James Dean, so don't expect much. I'm here to talk about a project called Weavr, which started off actually an idea we had together with York University quite a while ago actually. We'd been working on some ideas of increasing the value proposition within the world of esports, and something called the industrial strategy popped up. It was £33 million of funding. As ESL, we never actually explored any idea of funding before, and there was a segment called the demonstrator program, which meant we had to collaborate with the university to look at an opportunity to bring something to life into industry and obviously maximise some research, etc. And we actually applied, and there was 4 sections: moving image, performance, visitor experience, and sports entertainment. And after going through a kind of a worse than Dragon's Den experience with government, we actually managed to win £4 million in direct funding, which was fantastic. So we sort of panic stations, okay, we have to deliver something now. So as I say, I'm the CEO of ESL UK, and really in the UK we're quite a creative country, as you all know, being here, and we like to look at some problems. We also have a very strong academic system, and this was the first opportunity we had to work together in order to really look at a challenge we have, which I'll come on to in a short moment. So first of all, who are ESL? We were founded in 2000 in Cologne by a bunch of gaming geeks. I won't put it anyway differently. And it was basically brought together to start creating tournaments, originally as a LAN, and then things started to grow. And around 2015, ESL got to a stage where it was bought by a big sports rights company called MTG in Sweden. And we also saw at that time esports starting to really accelerate in the industry because of the content it was creating. It was actually attracting a viewership now, and things like Twitch, for example, being acquired by Amazon for $1 billion, etc. We start to see a lot of impact and a kind of another vertical to the gaming industry. So we have a platform, we run tournaments, we run events, and we create a lot of content. And the UK office was opened in 2012 as a franchise originally, and then it was acquired by the Germans in 2016. So we create ecosystems, and very importantly, we monetize those live broadcast experiences. Someone's got to pay for the event that's put on, and I'll come on to how we do that. So just to get an idea first, I'm sure everyone has seen esports, but I've got a short video just to give us a feel of what we're working on.
We've come far, experienced so much, been to so many places with so many people, with one destination in mind: to create a world where everybody can be somebody. A sport where every fan has a voice. A movement where anyone can come in. People came from all over the world to be a part of it, to prove that, if you want it enough, anything's possible. There's a hero hidden in all of us, waiting to leap out of our bedrooms and onto the world stage.
So when all of us here grow older and our children grow older, we'll tell them about how it all began.
A generation came together. Friends turned into leaders. Superstars stepped out of the shadows and inspired a whole sport to do the same.
You are the people who found esports, drove esports, and believed in it.
What happens next? Well, that depends on how we write it.
So the opportunity is expected 450 million people will watch or engage with esports this year alone, and that's growing as an aggregate of between 15 and 25%. So expected to reach over 1 billion in a few years' time. Now, the problem is, or the big challenge is, when we look at the revenue streams within the industry, a large and kind of imbalanced amount of money is actually coming from publisher contributions and sponsorships. The problem here is that if we look at the traditional sports space, it's very much driven by the third item in that list, which is media rights. The idea that broadcasters or big corporate companies can buy a media right and then monetize that with the fans directly. So they kind of become the middleman, in effect. They create content, they're selling advertising, sponsorships around that, maybe many other angles of monetization. But in esports, we don't have that. Esports primarily has always been streamed online, and it's been for free, and there's a big gap in that space. So in a way, when we look at the budgets that are actually achieving that big figure, that's missing. It's much, much lower than the traditional sports industry, even if it's the same amount of viewership. We have merchandise, event ticket sales, and subscriptions. But there is hope. We see something like this happen. So this was a snapshot in July this year. It's one event a year, the International, Dota 2. Hands up if anyone watches that. Oh, good, excellent. You're missing it right now. That actually got to about $34 million, and that is crowdfunded. That is the fans, the dedicated and hardcore fans, all coming together and saying, you know what, we want this to be bigger every single year. In return, you get some value for that. You get a digital compendium. You also get some extra content, etc. But what you're doing is actually contributing to your passion and an amazing event. So if you compare that, that could be considered as, you know, that hole in those media rights. It's not being bought out. So Weavr, the Weavr vision was to basically create something for the audience of the future, for that esports audience. That's what we've set out to do. And to do that, we're creating a world with more personalized, insightful, and enjoyable broadcast content. And that's not just for esports. I think esports is a very obvious place to start because of the nature of that younger millennial and Gen Z and beyond audience. But we also are surrounded by a huge amount of digital and data, digital assets and data, which allow us to really start to create something with machine learning and AI. So what are we creating? It's a platform, it's or an agnostic framework that utilizes machine learning and AI algorithms to create meaningful and personalized mixed reality experiences. And this is exactly where we're working with academia. We certainly couldn't do it without the vast amount of research that has been done at York University. And actually, that's what laid down the foundations of how us as industry could take that research and start to actually apply it to a commercial venture. There's 3 pillars we're looking at. Micro prediction, so things like death prediction or in-the-moment game analysis that allow us to create a better experience for a viewer. There's player value, so we can actually give individual players in the game more identity or more meaning or more purpose to understanding, you know, how well they're playing and are they doing the right job, or should we be booing them off the stage. And then macro prediction is actually looking at, obviously, the longer term or kind of disseminating the match itself, or bringing it closer to home in terms of easier to acknowledge narrative or analysis, etc., during the game, and then post-match as well, when we start to look into depth around the match itself. So the research is doing very well. As one esports said, it covered, it's pretty accurate too, so good work, York. Very pleased about the amount of collaboration that we have going. Just to touch on who they are, we have at the top ESL, which is obviously ourselves. We're leading the project. We've submitted the application as well, and York University, who basically worked very much on the actual proposal and the ideas that we were to present. Doc 10 up in Salford, who obviously the big studio broadcasting company and also operate for the BBC and ITV. They are spending a huge amount of time and effort in the virtual space to create virtual sets and present more data in a broadcast environment. Focal Point, who are Live 360 production company. Rewind, who are UI, UX and VR experiential type company. They make lots of different experiences in that space and kind of bring it to the forefront in different applications, etc. And Cybula, who are a data provider and bandwidth ISP that helped us get off the ground, so our AWS bill wasn't too high, basically. So, industry application. So taking this research, we had to consider, obviously, well, what's the value proposition to the end user? And Audience of the Future was all about immersion. So we started to look at the different segments of immersion. This actually came out of York University research as well, and analysing the space. We start with sensorial immersion, the obvious thing, the headsets, the sound, maybe touch. Cognitive, obviously analysing the data, creating narrative, and social, being able to share, disseminate, explain, etc. But the important thing is, and what we observed in industry, is that if you were to create some sort of experience based on just one of those elements of immersion, it just becomes quite gimmicky, and it doesn't really take off, because people don't want to pick up several devices or open different apps and try and jump across between them. They need one solution. And the other part is to make sure it's personalised. We can see that today that obviously kids don't really watch TV anymore. What they're looking for is a more personalised experience. They want whoever on YouTube or whatever content they would like when they want it. And then when we apply this to a live competition, it's about then providing an individual narrative. And obviously, it's not going to be possible to do that with humans, because we'd have to have just as many humans creating narrative than there are viewing. We need to create, basically, harness machine learning and AI to do exactly that. The timeline was that we started in January. That's when the government finally approved the project. Took us a month to kickstart, and our first aim was Birmingham. And I'll come on to what we did at Birmingham. That's our first MVP. And basically, the project runs until the end of December 2020. So, May 31st comes along, and we have to deliver something. What we decided to do was create an app. So while York was very busy developing and using research to create effectively a foundation of a framework, a B2B framework, the way we would see it in industry, Rewind were busy creating an app as a front end to demonstrate to the end users. I'll show you that in a second. We also worked with a key influencer, Odie Pixel, who's really good at data anyway. He's probably, if you don't watch it, he's like a horse racing commentator, but for games. Speaks very fast. It's quite entertaining. And we also demonstrated some Live 360 with Focal Point, and it was nice that we had the Minister of State at the time, Margot James, to join us and have a look at what we're doing. So the second video I'm going to show you is a kind of a report, really, on what we got up to in Birmingham.
Chosen the ESL1 Birmingham and later on this year, ESL1 Hamburg, as the first two opportunities to show influencers and the wider public how far we've gotten with development. We've kind of got the audience of the future here, now.
The app currently we're rolling out, we're super excited about it, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. What the Weavr app does, it looks at historic data of a current season, and it compares the live match with that data. So it can tell you a curated story about the extraordinary bits within the game. We want to give people the ability to screenshot and share that via Twitter, via social media, become creators and storytellers themselves. We're working with the fans here in the arena, we do surveys with them, we show them the app, get their input, and really work with them so that we have the best possible next iteration at ESL1 at Hamburg.
The app itself is built off this amazing data set driven by York University's AI technologies. But what we've done is made a really simple user interface to allow people to understand what's going on in the game. First of all, we have a top-down map view that shows us where all the players are all over the map at any time. We can scrub back and forward in time. The other area is the narrative feed. The feed itself is driven by little sound bites and snippets of key information. And the third area is where it gets really interesting, is the direct head-to-head stats, where people really want to get underneath what's going on in the match and see in real time what's happening.
Weavr have developed an amazing state-of-the-art app where people can follow what is going on in real time with an amazing number of analytics. I'm very proud of the Audience of the Future programme that has allocated this funding to Weavr, and it's great to see it so well used.
We actually got someone called Odie Pixel, and he's really one of the top commentators in Dota, with 100,000 followers, really the prominent figure.
I'm Odie Pixel, and I'm here at the moment being the brand ambassador for a very exciting new project called Weavr, which is allowing people to interact with the game Dota 2 that they know and love in a very different way. I mean, straight away, people are very excited to see data displayed, contextualized in a way that they just haven't been able to see before. The immediate reaction from most of the fans here is that, wow, it's something new, it's something exciting, it's what they want to look for, it's what they want to have open alongside the games when they watch them at home.
The ambition of the app is really exciting. If you can imagine what we've done here is just kind of scratch the surface, but proven out the tech stack. That's just like an initial layer.
So taking that into a virtual space, having a virtual viewing space that's augmented with exciting information and bits of stories, so the thing we're trying to push for Hamburg. And really also thinking about the post-game production, taking some of that virtual, that feel, that blend between virtual and physical space, taking that into post-game production.
The post-match analysis is where it gets really interesting from Doc10's perspective. So over the last few months, we've been focusing on building the infrastructure and the technologies into the facilities. We've been engaging with the fans at Birmingham, but we've also been engaging with ESL1's production team and some of the presenting talent, to try and really understand what's going to deliver a really exciting and different novel way of approaching post-match analysis. The virtual studio aspect of the Weavr platform is going to be a great way for fans to engage when anybody is interacting with the app on the second screen, that data will be captured and we'll be able to feed that back into our studio delivery platform. But we also need to consider how our presenting talent is going to be able to control and interact with this data.
Already been behind scenes explaining to the people that I work with what the app is, how it could benefit, and already they're very excited because it's something that not only can allow them to do their job better, it makes their job easier. It gives them information that they can then relay to the viewer on the broadcast with the simplicity that just hasn't been there before.
Team Secret, your ESL1 Birmingham 2019 champions.
So it's really incredible to actually see this not only come about within around 3 months of development from the actual product starting, but also it's very important to remember that the foundation of this was literally the research that York University had done. That power within to industry has a huge impact. And just to give you a bit of context there, there's been several attempts to deliver similar sort of data analytics and AI, etc., which even when there's been millions of pounds put behind it from industry has really not got anywhere. And there's a good example, Dojo Madness, for example, which is doing some good things, but it's taken them about 2 years and several million to get there. And just within 3 months, genuinely, Weavr has accelerated way beyond that. It can do a lot more, and it's more accurate as well, of course. And then we look at actually a sponsor of ESL 1. SAP came along, they thought, you know what, let's sponsor this event. What we're going to get out of it, we want to be seen as the best data analytics firm within the space. It might be a new vertical for us. But again, they were completely missing the mark. So I think the thing I learned from actually finally engaging with the university itself was actually understanding what that research is about and then trying to figure out as industry how that actually fits into the space and how we can actually bring that to a commercial proposition. Obviously, we took the route of funding with government, and that's usually quite a common thing, I guess. But the other aspect that, and certainly in our experience, was that York University was quite proactive on reaching out to industry. It was the research that we were working with was within what's called DC Labs, and which effectively had an outreach campaign to industry, and we're invited up to see what was being worked on, and that really was the start of the relationship. Because otherwise, it's very difficult to try and understand. Say, well, you know, a news article might come up, or research might be published, but from industry, no one really reads that and goes, oh, that could work in this space here. It has to take that kind of few conversations over a beer as such to actually figure out what it can look like. So another area York is working on is around the evaluation side of things. Obviously, there's more data there. We did a lot of analysis around the viewers and the players that we had, qualitative and quantitative evaluations, and we can go into a lot more detail about that. And I'll invite Simon up shortly to do the Q&A, so you can ask the tough questions. And also assessing the visibility around actually what's the impact, what's the online with what we've created. Are we going right down the right paths? Is the product working? And you know, with OD Pixel, basically we asked him to create 5 tweets over the period of the tournament, and it was all organic. He reached a huge amount of impressions and direct engagements of likes and retweets, etc. I think that's really important, and again, that's a place for industry to really try and find, you know, how does this research really apply to the space. And also, it was really nice that ESL 1 was basically the best Dota 2 event to date from ESL's perspective. We had a very positive feedback and record viewership, which was great, and I'm sure we've had a part to play in that. So moving on to XR, I think this is another area of research, and really it's an area that you know, not many people get to play around with in industry, you know, apart from, you know, what comes out of the likes of Oculus or Magic Leap, etc. And the way I see this is that within our academic structure, there's opportunity for research to be done which industry would never touch, because it's very difficult for us ever to apply any sort of funding to working out if something would work or not, or whether we're going to uncover something without really a direct end result and commercial value. Otherwise, it's just far too risky. And certainly my lesson is that collaboration is actually fundamentally key to actually exploring that. So XR, we know, is a new medium, and it really does humanize and connect us with technology like never before. It's you know, we've had keyboards and mouses for some time now. So we think beyond storytelling. You know, we've been telling stories for 100,000 of years. We've been sitting around campfires. We've been drawing on walls, showing how to hunt a deer. But really, that goes to story living. We're actually inside that space, and we're part of it. And I think that's where VR really apply. But again, that alone is kind of gimmicky. We've seen some examples, even the World Cup, there was a great example of, hey, why don't you enjoy the World Cup in a social co-presence environment, put on a headset, watch a virtual TV in a virtual living room with virtual people. Great. Sounds brilliant. I'll do that all day long. And I'll come on to a very sneak preview that no one's ever seen before outside of the Weavr team in a moment on what we're doing in this space. Just to touch on the app in case it didn't come through, and remember the app is the front end to the research. It's been primarily developed by Rewind, but it's the AI, the research around dynamic storytelling here, AI-driven storytelling. Ultimately, every single of these news feeds, if you like, will be personalized to every single individual based on their individual preferences, maybe their favorite teams, etc. And then we have the map view, which gave us an opportunity to layer on different viewpoints, such as lane dominance. There was also match prediction as well, looking at that micro side of things. And that was working extremely well, quite accurate. I can't remember the percentage of accuracy now. 88%, was it? Yes. And the user feedback, obviously, again, another thing that we can get from industry with a very large fan base is that really it does make Dota 2 accessible. It's, again, that macro dissemination is working. They love the design. Without that design, it's no good looking at a black screen with a stream of numbers coming down it. That's not going to work. And the AI-driven narrative was very impressive to consider that there was no human involved in actually creating those snippets. It was also encouraging to see that a lot of users already own VR headsets, and another 20% were looking to buy them. So we knew we were in the right space. And in fact, if we look at the number of headsets now connecting on Steam, it's looking pretty promising. So we could be in a good place here to actually explore that further and make that research even more accessible to end users. So we start with our time map, and we end up basically being Ready Player one day. And we also see it works in industry. Pokemon Go, for example, using just basic AR. It took the world by storm. Something Rewind worked on, they actually recreated the whole of Red Bull Air Race in VR, basically utilizing just the data streams. Imagine how far this could go with applying that research again. And I've got a quick video on Rewind as well, quickly. There we go. The audio is not working. But you get the idea. So basically you could watch and see the entire air race with a HoloLens on it. There's number 2 coming along, and obviously Magic Leap as well. And interestingly, the Magic Verse layers in the fact that basically everything is going to rely on data and XR at some point. And we've seen this, some basic examples in the broadcast side of things as well. This was League of Legends finals, and an entire, in fact, the amazing thing here is that just by using AR, an entire new pop band was basically created, which was a combination of human and 3D models, and that was basically #1 hit and another massive vertical for the industry. So what's next? So we move on to Hamburg this year, and we'll be basically advancing the app, hopefully implementing some more of the work that York are doing. We'll also start presenting more in the VR space. But just to give you a bit of story on where we'll take this, obviously as a university there's an opportunity for the research to actually apply officially in a commercial environment. So effectively by the end of the project what we'd like to see is that an actual legal entity is created, Weavr Limited, And within that, an IP transfer from academia, which will actually then, as part of an equity swap, which then will actually basically be able to fund further research and make job opportunities, obviously, for the people involved. And we're very, very confident that is going to happen. Bear in mind that this, within 3 months, has done a lot more, a hell of a lot more than some companies have done in several years. Obviously, anyone is invited to Hamburg, and we can arrange tickets, etc. We would like to pair up people with opportunities. There's a lot of B2B going on, and sometimes I guess when I don't know, but I imagine when you're working on research, you're a bit disconnected from that end result. So seeing it and seeing the potential opportunities in the flesh could be handy. And phase 2, as I say, will be working on a second MVP. The app will be relaunched and a VR experience, which I'm going to show you just very briefly, something we've not shared before. The battle room. So the idea being is that we're taking, again, all of that data dissemination and overlaying it in a 3D environment. We have social co-present, we have the personalization, we have the cognitive immersion, and we have the sensorial immersion for the first time in one place, so we can share, we can see the match, we can go out and experience the arena itself. And generally, that's something that's not been seen before. So we're extremely excited to see what the users will make of that. So consider from those research papers all the way to this, in the period of just about 9 months, is pretty incredible. And we certainly couldn't have done it without that. And just to touch on why, on the benefits, just to bring it back again, it really is creating that unique experience which enriches the knowledge. Imagine the idea that you could be playing a game of Dota and effectively Weavr is telling you how you can play better or how you would pair up in the match you're watching. And I think that's really exciting. I mean, that's why people started watching esports in the first place, really. And then obviously increasing that narrative along the way. And importantly, within industry, we're filling that gap. That media rights gap is being filled because IP owners, such as Dota or ESL or other games or other sports, of course, will be able to really engage with those fans a lot more direct. Something that really hasn't been cracked before, but thanks to our collaboration and the funding behind it, we're able to explore that and make a few mistakes along the way. That concludes the presentation, so thanks very much. I'm going to invite Simon up for Q&A. Hopefully you've got lots of questions, and I think we're running just spot on time as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you for the great talk. We have actually plenty of time for questions.
Or beer.
So this might sound a little critical, and I apologise in advance for that.
That's fine.
Could I suggest that you go back and look over your 2 videos that you've put in the slides there and play a game of Spot the Woman? Because there are very, very few. I've never seen such gender imbalance embedded into such short videos. So there's clearly an issue there. There's a big problem in data-driven AI approaches like machine learning, where you start with biased data and the AI compounds that issue. So is there a concern that you're building an app just for men, which will worsen the gender imbalance that there is in esports?
I'll take the first question, you take the second.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Gaming originally was a boy thing. We grew up, I remember growing up, there was like 4 of us in the class playing games, and we're all boys. And games were developed for boys in mind, and it definitely was a problem. We started seeing a turning point when, obviously, from a commercial perspective, game developers said, "Oh, hang on a second, we're dismissing half the population here. Let's address that." And we started to see games such as Overwatch appear, now Fortnite, which which does appeal more to a female audience, as it was also more popular to play games. From an ESL perspective, we are addressing that. We do have a diversity initiative called AnyKey. It's actually looking at diversity across the board, but really our only issue is the gender imbalance. The game industry had been struggling with that and making some good work in fixing it. But it's going to take some time, unfortunately. Thankfully, we have had another female join the Weavr consortium just very recently, but still, I would say it's about 85% male at the moment, and white at that matter, unfortunately. Yeah, it's one of those really tricky things. Actually, there has been work done by collaboration with academia as well in that space. So AnyKey is a collaboration with industry, so ESL, Intel, and MIT. But it's open for a lot more around what can be done. There's a lot of psychology and research done around the events themselves, obviously from interviews and looking at the space. And actually, back in 2014, 2015, if we went to one of our events, if there was a female there, it was because it was the girlfriend. Now, genuinely, there are groups of females coming to the events and enjoying it. But then on the flip side, on the player base, there is a major problem there. What's happened around Counter-Strike as part of AnyKey is that, and interviewing a lot of the females who did play or do play Counter-Strike very well, is that they opted for an all-female league to begin with, just so a level of experience and practice, etc., can form, and a viewer base and an audience that considers in a similar way to traditional sports. But of course, the opportunity here is that they can play together because there's no physical barrier in actually creating mixed teams. It's really hard to say when that will happen, but we are starting to see more and more female protagonists, if you like, to come through, and there's a lot of support for them. The environment online used to be extremely toxic. That's been actually addressed as well to some degree. It's still bad, but there is a lot more work being done there. But yeah, thanks. That's fine, and it's a very good question, and it's worth considering. You can take the AI question.
Yeah, so from the data perspective at the moment, what we're primarily looking on is using this as a way to get more insight into what the professionals do as a decision. And at the moment, we're only focusing on a number of the ESL tournaments for Dota 2, specifically men's tournaments. I guess they are open to women. I don't think they're excluded. But what that means for the data is more the fact that we're only analysing at the moment professional data to showcase what's happening, to give more insights, to reduce the complexity at the professional level. So it doesn't take, I'm not trying to say that it's gender neutral, but it's definitely, we don't look at gender at all in any of the AI that we're doing to drive the application. Where that gender gap will come in, it will be, I guess, in the personalisation. So if we don't have enough, I guess, female users of the application, trying to figure out ideal personalisation for that market will be extremely difficult, because what we'll do is we'll end up doing, clustering and different data-driven methods to figure out groups of users, and that will be heavily dominated. So there will be a problem, I guess, at the personalisation level, but the actual data that's driving like win probabilities and things is actually just coming direct from the games. So that sort of data is, I guess, less hindered by that sort of bias, but I think we're going to have to be really careful. And there's a lot of research opportunities around that hyper-personalisation that we haven't addressed yet. And, we're always looking for new researchers in that space.
And just to add as well, one of the applications of the data analysis is actually to empower content creators. And there is less shortage in that female space, so there's quite a few very good female pundits within the esports space that do a very good job of analysing and presenting the tournaments. But also remember, we're looking at the traditional sports industry as well, so we have an opportunity to maybe choose a female sport to look at an IP that we can test the water with, and maybe we can make some interesting analysis between the two. But thanks.
Any other question?
So I guess you guys are aware that recently there's been a lot of AI development in actually playing Dota. And I was wondering, A, what you think of it, and B, if you see any use of this for the developments you're looking at. So do you have any plans to kind of, utilize this in any form?
Just from an entertainment perspective to start with, it's really interesting. The human versus AI play is different when it's not. It's AI for the game AI, isn't it? Because you're basically getting AI to play the game that's developed on the load of AI. And we actually ran the production for Google DeepMind with StarCraft. It was incredible. It was just stuck at 99% probability the AI will win. And being dipped to 98% once. But people actually really enjoyed watching it and seeing what humans can create to actually compete. And then the craziest thing was the idea of two AIs playing the game between each other and watching that, which was quite popular as well. And then we see what Elon Musk is doing, etc. And then you think about what's going in, we're working with Formula E, and obviously they're working on robo-racing as well, which is the idea of just these cars now driving themselves without a human involved. But I guess it's a test of the ability of humans to create that AI in the first place. Right now, this audience are early adopters, and they love technology and Teslas. It's really interesting, and a very, very interesting area. How this would apply, could maybe the world will just implode. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I'm not sold on the OpenAI 5 just yet. I think they play a very different game of Dota, which humans can't play, especially having individual careers and microing health percentage and dips. So I think it's amazing the work that they do there, and I think the AIs are super impressive. But where I see that going in the future and a potential for us, although it's going to take a while and would be sort of a very big question in all esports, is the what if question. So a lot of time when you do the post-game analysis, you'll have the commentators and they'll be like, if he'd only just bought his BKB before this fight started, he would have got out alive, the whole game would have changed. So how could we maybe utilize the OpenAI 5 data, AI bots, and actually play that what if scenario out? I think that's what we get with esports as a medium, rather than what you get in. You can't do that in traditional sports. You could get 5, football players out there to recreate it if the defender was in another position, but it just wouldn't have the same, right? Yeah, sure. I don't know what a sport is, but do you know what I mean? So, I think that type of research can really answer that what-if question. And I think we're a long way from that. But I think that's where these types of AIs should go in the future.
Thank you.
You just give me some ideas, Simon.
What?
Scope creep, here we come.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the problems, yeah.
So you just mentioned that there would be, there is some form of intent to move this sort of visualization to traditional sports. But I would imagine that there is already in traditional sport like some form of like established form of visualization which is used in broadcasting. So what I would like to hear is like how much of that was actually inspiring your like way of like driving the narrative in this app, and like what do you think you can bring new to the actual like physical sport?
It's safe to say, actually, within ESL, we do have quite a few very dedicated sports fans, unlike Simon here. And yeah, absolutely, there was some inspiration there from especially what the NFL are doing, etc. But I also think that when we looked at that competitive landscape, are we on something here? Esports gave us an opportunity with more data fidelity to actually do some different things. So our actual pathway is way beyond what we can see on existing broadcasts. Obviously, one area Weavr won't really be working on, our motto is not to reinvent any wheels, is the data capture aspects. There's lots of clever research and companies doing things in that space, but how will the framework actually apply to the data available, human insights, etc., and what's the opportunity to monetize again? And we will consult with those industries. I think sports like F1 or cricket are probably really obvious because the amount of data behind it, and actually a huge amount of the enjoyment is the semantics and the analysis of that data, and they're quite long days, aren't they? But yeah, we're quite confident we can go beyond what's available, and some of the sports IPs are also very, very keen on looking at that as well.
Question? Owen? I have a question. Is all this data available, or will it become available for research beyond York?
Yeah, so actually all the Dota data is available. So it's free for anyone to access through the Open Data API. And our research, primarily some of the stuff that's driving it, there is some secret source, but our win predictor, which really helps give a complexity reduction and tell people a score of get that real insight into the game. We've published that earlier this year and how that works. And I've got some personal publications coming up now. It's rival games conferences that are some other pillars. So we are publishing it as a research organisation, and what being part of this sort of big consortium allows us to do is have that industry impact. And I think that's really important because, as a young career researcher, it's hard to see when we have these great, even from an AI perspective here, you have these great AIs, and then in all the games industry, go, well, that's probably too hard to implement in our games, so we'll just do what we've always done. And actually getting that industry impact is really important. And so what we're doing, we're still doing the university thing and publishing it and making it available, so researchers know how we're doing it. But I guess the general public don't read research papers, so we're fine without people discovering actually what runs it.
Thank you. So it's really interesting. It was an interesting question session here. Have you seen anyone trying to take advantage of your win rate prediction? Because I suppose the model you train relies on a particular playing style or a particular distribution of playing styles. Now, if that changes, the win predictions would probably get less accurate. If I was an esports team, I would try to exploit that.
There's definitely a commercial model behind training, and some teams are very interested in that. In fact, there's been a few up at York. I think there are also dangers as well. The gambling industry, for example, you can't escape from gambling. It's going to be there, whether it's the black market, the grey market, the legitimate market. With something like this, there's a
quite a responsibility because you could clean up.
Right. You can learn to look like you're winning.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. But then at the same time, I mean, ESL ourselves, we are part of a organisation called ESIC, the Esports Integrity Coalition, and we are our first partner in that space, which was mainly to look at the gambling market, make sure there's no match fixing, etc., or untoward behaviour, was partnering with a company called Sport Radar, who did a lot of that analysis, etc. But I think it's safe to say that the York research is again better than the stuff that they've got. We just need to apply it properly, and you're absolutely right, there's a responsibility and there's a danger, and it can't ruin the game, otherwise we'll lose all our viewers and we'll be out of jobs.
There's one more if there's one. There's none. So we can thank once more.
Thank you.